Imagine standing beneath the blazing Egyptian sun more than 3,000 years ago. Before you stretch an enormous granite quarry unlike anything you have ever seen. Dust hangs in the air. The rhythmic echoes of hammering bounce from the towering stone walls. Hundreds of workers move with incredible coordination, carving directly into the living bedrock. Then your eyes settle on something almost impossible to comprehend. Resting silently in the center of the quarry lies a single colossal block of pink granite, still attached to the earth that gave it birth. Even today, after more than 3 millennia, it dominates the landscape with an almost supernatural presence. This is the unfinished obelisk of Aswan, measuring an astonishing 137 feet in length, more than 42 feet wide at its base, and weighing an estimated 1,168 tons. It is heavier than any stone monument ever successfully transported in the ancient world. Had it been completed, it would have become the largest single piece of carved stone ever created by human hands. It would have dwarfed every obelisk that still stands across Egypt today. Rising toward the heavens, it would have been the ultimate symbol of Egyptian engineering, power, and ambition. But before we uncover the incredible mystery hidden inside this forgotten monument, take a second to subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Now, despite all of that effort, this colossal monument never left the quarry. According to the story repeated in history books for generations, everything came to an abrupt end when disaster struck. As workers approached the final stages of separating the massive monument from the surrounding bedrock, a long crack suddenly appeared deep within the granite. The flaw was fatal. The stone could no longer support its own weight. Years of labor had been destroyed in a single moment. Faced with an impossible problem, the workers abandoned the project exactly where it stood. Their tools fell silent. The quarry emptied. The unfinished giant remained trapped forever inside the granite floor. For over 3,000 years, it has rested there untouched, slowly transforming from an abandoned construction project into one of Egypt's greatest archaeological attractions. To most historians, it represents something very simple, a monument to human ambition that ultimately exceeded human capability. Even the master builders of ancient Egypt, they argue, sometimes failed. Nature won. The Egyptians accepted defeat and moved on. For well over a century, that explanation satisfied almost everyone. It fit perfectly with what archaeologists believed they knew about ancient Egyptian engineering. The unfinished obelisk became evidence that these remarkable builders still had limitations. The crack proved that even the greatest civilization could not overcome every obstacle. The abandoned monument became a lesson in practicality. When a project became impossible, the Egyptians simply accepted the loss and started another. It was a reasonable story. It was logical. It appeared to explain everything. But history has a habit of hiding its greatest mysteries in the smallest details. And for visitors who walk through the Aswan quarry today, carefully studying the stone instead of simply admiring its enormous size, something else begins to stand out. Something that the traditional explanation never truly addresses. Scattered throughout the quarry are hundreds of strange marks carved directly into some of the hardest granite on Earth. At first glance, they seem ordinary, almost insignificant. But the longer you study them, the stranger they become. These are not random chips or rough impact scars left behind by centuries of work. Instead, they appear as smooth, scoop-shaped depressions carved into the granite with remarkable consistency. Each one measures roughly 6 to 8 inches across and between 2 and 4 inches deep. They repeat over and over again across the quarry floor, lining the trenches surrounding the unfinished obelisk and extending throughout the entire excavation site. Their curved surfaces are smooth. Their dimensions remain surprisingly uniform. Their spacing follows patterns that seem deliberate rather than accidental. They do not resemble the chaotic damage expected from workers repeatedly smashing heavy stones against solid granite. Instead, they almost resemble the controlled path of a precision cutting tool moving steadily through rock. And that simple observation has forced researchers to ask an uncomfortable question. Are these really the marks we should expect from the tools ancient Egypt supposedly possessed? In recent years, advances in modern technology have allowed scientists to examine these mysterious markings with a level of precision that earlier generations could never achieve. High-resolution digital photography captured every microscopic detail. Three-dimensional surface mapping measured their exact shapes. Microscopic examinations revealed tiny patterns invisible to the naked eye. Statistical analysis compared hundreds of individual scoop marks across different parts of the quarry, measuring their width, depth, spacing, curvature, and overall consistency. Instead of relying on visual impressions, researchers could finally examine the evidence mathematically. And the results were far more surprising than anyone expected. Rather than revealing random variations typical of manual labor, the measurements exposed an extraordinary level of uniformity. Many of the marks shared nearly identical dimensions, their curves repeated with remarkable consistency. Their spacing followed patterns that appeared deliberate instead of accidental. The more data researchers collected, the more difficult it became to explain these features as nothing more than random pounding with handheld stone hammers. If these observations are correct, the implications stretch far beyond a single unfinished monument. They force historians to reconsider one of the most fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian technology. What tools did these builders actually possess? Were they limited to the simple equipment that survives in museums today? Or did they employ techniques that have completely vanished from the archaeological record? Could there have been methods of working granite far more sophisticated than historians currently imagine? These questions are uncomfortable because they challenge a narrative that has remained largely unchanged for generations. The mystery is no longer just about one abandoned obelisk. It is about whether our entire understanding of Egyptian engineering has overlooked something hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. To appreciate why these marks are so important, we first need to understand the extraordinary material the Egyptians were working with. The granite quarries of Aswan supplied stone to Egypt almost continuously from the earliest dynasties onward. Their distinctive pink granite, filled with black and white mineral crystals, became one of the most valuable building materials in the ancient world. It was chosen for monuments intended to last forever. Towering obelisks, massive temple columns, royal sarcophagi, colossal statues, and sacred architectural elements reserved for Egypt's most important religious sites. Unlike softer limestone, which gradually erodes over time, Aswan granite has survived nearly 5,000 years of wind, sandstorms, heat, and seasonal flooding with astonishing durability. Many monuments carved from this stone still preserve remarkably sharp details despite the passage of millennia. Its beauty made it priceless. Its strength made it nearly eternal. But that same strength also created one of the greatest engineering challenges imaginable. Granite ranks between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, making it one of the hardest common stones used in ancient construction. Now compare that with the metals available to Egyptian craftsmen. Copper, the primary metal tool documented throughout much of ancient Egyptian history, has a hardness of only about 3. Even bronze, an alloy stronger than copper, reaches only around 3.5 to 4. In simple terms, the metal tools were dramatically softer than the granite they were supposedly cutting. Every strike against the stone would damage the tool far more than the rock itself. Copper chisels would bend, flatten, and dull rapidly. Edges would deform within minutes. Continuous cutting would become painfully slow and incredibly inefficient. Modern materials science confirms what basic physics already suggests. You simply cannot carve enormous quantities of hard granite using copper tools alone. The stone wins almost every time. To solve this problem, archaeologists developed what has long been considered the standard explanation. The secret, they argue, was never the metal. It was the hammer. Specifically, rounded balls of an extremely hard volcanic rock known as dolerite. Dolerite possesses a hardness close to that of granite itself. Instead of slicing through the stone, ancient workers repeatedly pounded its surface with these heavy stone balls. Every blow fractured tiny fragments from the granite. One strike removed almost nothing. Hundreds removed a shallow depression. Thousands deepened it further. Millions of carefully repeated impacts could eventually carve trenches deep enough to isolate enormous stone blocks from the surrounding bedrock. It was unimaginably slow, physically exhausting work, but in theory, it was entirely possible. Supporting this explanation is a substantial amount of archaeological evidence. Thousands of worn dolerite pounding stones have been recovered throughout the Aswan quarries. Many display polished surfaces and flattened impact areas created by years of heavy use. Others were discarded after becoming too rounded or too small to remain effective. Their presence leaves little doubt that Egyptian workers used dolerite extensively during quarry operations. This evidence is genuine, and few archaeologists dispute it. The connection between the tools and the quarry is firmly established. Dolerite was unquestionably part of the construction process. But acknowledging that fact raises an entirely different question. Does the existence of dolerite automatically explain every mark carved into the granite? Or could these pounding stones represent only one part of a much larger technological process? To answer that question, modern experimental archaeologists decided to recreate ancient Egyptian techniques as accurately as possible. Using replicas of dolerite pounding stones, copper chisels, abrasive sand, and other materials available during the Pharaonic period, researchers attempted to reproduce the quarrying methods described by mainstream archaeology. The experiments confirmed several important points. Granite can indeed be shaped by repeated dolerite impacts. Trenches can eventually be excavated. Surfaces can be smoothed after enormous amounts of labor. The ancient methods are physically possible. No one seriously disputes that. But as the experiments continued, another problem emerged, one that became increasingly difficult to ignore. The surfaces created by these modern reconstructions looked nothing like the mysterious marks preserved in the Aswan quarry. Experimental pounding produced rough, uneven textures filled with random impact scars. Every worker struck the stone with slightly different force. Every angle varied. Every blow created unique fractures. The resulting surfaces reflected that natural inconsistency. Depressions differed in size. Depths changed unpredictably. Patterns appeared chaotic, exactly as one would expect when thousands of individual impacts accumulate over time. Human labor naturally creates variation. Absolute consistency is almost impossible. Yet, the quarry itself tells a different story. The scoop-shaped depressions surrounding the unfinished obelisk appear smoother where experiments produced roughness. They remain remarkably uniform where modern reconstructions generated irregularity. Their spacing repeats with unusual consistency, where manual labor should produce randomness. Instead of chaotic impact scars, the granite often displays flowing curves that almost resemble the controlled motion of a guided cutting tool. The contrast between experiment and archaeological evidence became so striking that researchers began measuring every detail statistically rather than relying on visual comparisons alone. Hundreds of scoop marks were photographed, mapped, measured, and analyzed using modern imaging software. Widths, depths, radii of curvature, spacing between adjacent marks, and surface geometry were all compared across the quarry. For the first time, the mystery could be studied not through speculation, but through precise mathematical data. And as the numbers accumulated, they revealed patterns that only deepened one of archaeology's greatest unanswered questions. If these marks were truly created by simple pounding stones, why do they look so unlike anything those stones produce today? Imagine lowering yourself into a narrow shaft carved straight down through solid granite. The walls rise around you like a stone chimney, blocking out almost all sunlight. Every sound echoes. Every breath feels heavier than the last. Now imagine trying to carve this shaft deeper, using nothing but a heavy stone hammer, swinging it thousands upon thousands of times in a space barely wide enough for your shoulders. It sounds impossible. Yet somehow, the evidence inside the Aswan quarry suggests that someone accomplished exactly that. Or perhaps they accomplished it in a way we have never fully understood. As researchers continued analyzing the mysterious scoop-shaped marks surrounding the unfinished obelisk, the numbers they uncovered became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Across large sections of the quarry, the dimensions of these marks varied by less than 5%. The spacing between them differed by less than 3%. Even more remarkable, the sweeping curves carved into the granite remained almost perfectly consistent across distances stretching dozens of feet. The same width, the same depth, the same elegant arc repeated over and over again with a level of precision that seemed almost mechanical. It was as though an invisible template had guided every cut through one of the hardest stones on Earth. That degree of consistency simply does not resemble the work of human muscles alone. Anyone who has performed repetitive manual labor understands why. Muscles tire, hands shake, concentration fades. A worker swinging a heavy dolerite hammer hour after hour naturally changes posture to relieve pain. The force behind each blow fluctuates. One craftsman strikes differently from another. Even the same person cannot reproduce thousands of identical impacts over days or weeks without variation. The physical reality of human movement makes such perfection nearly impossible. Yet the granite at Aswan refuses to display those expected imperfections. Instead of random impact scars, the stone presents an almost rhythmic pattern, suggesting a controlled process that maintained identical depth, identical spacing, and identical curvature regardless of where the work was performed. To the researchers studying these surfaces, the marks began looking less like the result of repeated hammer blows, and more like the path traced by a tool following a predetermined course. As the investigation progressed, another possibility emerged, one that challenged decades of accepted thinking. The scoop-shaped depressions appeared remarkably similar to marks produced by rotational cutting rather than percussion. Instead of looking like thousands of individual impacts smashing into the granite, they resembled the smooth path created by a tool spinning through the stone in a controlled arc. The curved geometry repeated so consistently that many researchers found it difficult to imagine a handheld hammer creating such patterns. A rotating mechanism, however, naturally produces sweeping curves with uniform depth and predictable spacing. But that possibility introduced an even greater mystery. A rotating cutting tool requires continuous motion. Continuous motion requires a mechanism capable of maintaining speed, pressure, and direction over long periods of time. Ancient Egypt, according to everything currently accepted, possessed no such technology. No rotary cutting machines have ever been recovered. Egyptian tomb paintings show no powered quarry equipment. Ancient inscriptions remain completely silent on the existence of any advanced stone-cutting devices. History insists such technology never existed. And yet, carved permanently into the granite itself, the marks remain impossible to ignore. The mystery becomes even more fascinating when researchers examine where many of these cuts actually appear. Throughout the quarry are locations where the traditional dolerite hammer explanation seems extraordinarily difficult to apply. Deep inside sharp corners, where there is barely enough room to stand, let alone swing a heavy stone with full force, the same smooth scoop marks continue uninterrupted. Along nearly vertical walls, where gravity works against anyone attempting overhead pounding, identical patterns appear with no obvious reduction in quality. Beneath partially separated blocks of granite, where workers would have been forced into cramped spaces with only a few feet of clearance above their heads, the same precision continues as though the physical limitations simply did not matter. These are places where a wide hammer swing becomes almost impossible, yet the granite displays no sign of awkward workmanship or declining accuracy. Instead, the surfaces remain astonishingly uniform. Whatever created these marks seems to have operated just as effectively inside confined spaces as it did across wide-open quarry floors. This observation has enormous implications. If the conventional explanation struggles to account for work inside such restricted environments, then perhaps the tool itself functioned differently than archaeologists have imagined. Rather than requiring the broad, swinging arc of a heavy pounding stone, perhaps it was compact. Perhaps it removed granite through continuous contact instead of repeated impacts. Perhaps it could reach places where human arms wielding large dolerite balls simply could not function efficiently. Of course, no such instrument has ever been discovered. Museums contain no mysterious granite-cutting machines hidden beneath layers of Egyptian sand. No ancient artist painted workers using compact rotary devices. No surviving papyrus describes such technology. The archaeological record remains frustratingly silent, but silence in written history does not erase physical evidence. The marks are still there, preserved exactly where they were created thousands of years ago, inviting each new generation to explain how they came into existence. Then there are the test pits, perhaps the most overlooked and yet most astonishing features within the entire quarry complex. Scattered across Aswan are narrow vertical shafts descending 30, 40, and sometimes even 50 feet into solid granite. Most measure only 3 or 4 feet across. According to traditional archaeology, these were exploratory pits. Before investing months of labor extracting an enormous block, quarry workers needed to know whether the stone beneath the surface remained free of cracks, mineral intrusions, or structural flaws. Digging a narrow test shaft allowed them to inspect the quality of the granite before committing to a massive construction project. At first glance, this explanation seems perfectly reasonable. But once again, the practical realities raise uncomfortable questions. Standing inside a shaft only a few feet wide, how could anyone generate enough momentum to swing a heavy dolerite hammer effectively? With almost no room for movement, each strike would be awkward and weak. The deeper the shaft became, the more impossible the task appears. And the challenges did not end there. Every strike against the granite would generate shattered rock, dust, and broken fragments that accumulated at the bottom of the pit. Somehow, all of that debris had to be lifted manually through a 50-foot vertical shaft before work could continue. Meanwhile, sunlight barely reached the bottom except for perhaps a few brief moments each day, leaving workers to operate in near darkness. Fine granite dust would quickly fill the confined space, making every breath more difficult than the last. Fresh air circulation inside such a narrow shaft would be extremely limited. Heat trapped by the surrounding stone would only worsen the conditions. Exhaustion, dehydration, and suffocation would become constant threats. Simply imagining labor under those circumstances is enough to understand why many engineers describe the logistics as nightmarish. Yet, despite all these obstacles, the shafts undeniably exist. Even more remarkable is what researchers found when they examined the walls inside these pits. From the very top all the way to depths approaching 50 feet, the same mysterious scoop-shaped marks appear again and again. They remain just as smooth, just as evenly spaced, and just as consistent as those found across the open quarry floor. There is no gradual decline in workmanship as conditions become increasingly difficult, no growing irregularity caused by darkness, fatigue, or restricted movement. The precision remains almost unchanged from beginning to end. It is as though the challenges faced by the workers had no measurable effect whatsoever on the finished surfaces. Such consistency becomes increasingly difficult to reconcile with a process relying solely on human endurance inside one of the harshest working environments imaginable. As researchers expanded their investigation, another extraordinary pattern began to emerge. The locations of these deep test pits were anything but random. Using modern geological surveys, scientists compared the ancient excavation sites with the hidden internal structure of the granite formation itself. Astonishingly, many pits aligned with underground fault lines, mineral veins, and natural planes of weakness invisible from the surface. Somehow, the quarry workers repeatedly chose locations that maximized their chances of reaching high-quality stone while avoiding hidden defects. Today, geologists identify such underground features using ground-penetrating radar, seismic imaging, and advanced geological mapping. Yet the ancient quarry appears to have accomplished something remarkably similar thousands of years before such technology existed. Were these choices simply the result of generations of accumulated experience? Or did the builders possess a level of geological understanding that modern archaeology has underestimated? Once again, the evidence raises questions far more easily than it provides answers.